Disruption's broader, global. It's deeper in the impact it's having across our business systems and our socioeconomic systems and our economies, and it's going faster because of technology and the focus and the amount of capital that's flowing into disruption. So for all those reasons, you're seeing a quantum secular change going on in our society, in our economies. I would say there's a lot of drivers, but two big macro drivers are as follows. We're in this era of platforms. And what's changed is that the customer, the global citizen, is communicating on social media, digital platforms. They're shopping on digital platforms. They're working increasingly on interconnected digital platforms. They're entertaining themselves on digital platforms. They're spending a disproportionate share of their time, not just free time, but time, in an interconnected world. And what that's doing for the first time in our history is the global citizen is communicating who they are, what they're interested, what they want to do, what they like, what they don't like, what they believe about, what they don't believe, to a global audience. And we've never seen that in our history. As a banking institution, our customers used to talk to their family, to their partners, their spouse, maybe their closest friend about what's going on in their life, what their financial needs might be. Then they came and they told us. They walked into our branch, they called us on the telephone, they went on our website, they searched that recently. But they never broadcast what's going on in their life, whether they're getting married, starting a company, getting divorced, having a child, want to buy a car, want to go to school. All that's on your Facebook page. All that's built into what you search for. All that's built into even how you entertain yourself and what work platforms you use. So you're broadcasting who you are, what you want, and what's important to you to a global audience. And that's new. And that is the most disruptive technology business model, which is in itself breaking down the barriers of industry and breaking down and challenging business leaders across every dimension, including banking, to maintain their relevance to customers in a very different way than they have in the past. And the success models that we've enjoyed and what we've competed on. So in that old world I described of a customer coming to us with their needs, seeking financial solutions, we competed on convenience. We built branches on every corner so we were close. We hired and trained the best people and everyone laid the same claim. We built efficiencies of scale so we could offer value through price. And those competitive models lasted for 150 years. You're in a world now where a customer who used to walk into us is now broadcasting that need set to a global audience through these platforms who maintain enormous power because of that information flow and can broker that power into new players and sending those signals to the highest bidder, sending those signals to a preferred partner, or ultimately, as we expect, whether it's Amazon Bank or others, acting on those signals themselves for their own profit. And therefore, as an institution, a B2C services company, a B2B services company, you have to reinvent your organization to be at that moment of truth, to pick up that signal and then provide relevant value through new channels and new capabilities to the customer. That is fundamentally disruptive at its core. And that's the world we live in and we're trying to adjust to. There could be a number of drivers that vie for second place, but I would list climate change as one of the greatest drivers of what's going on. Climate change is impacting how we feed ourselves, how society is organizing. It's affecting economics of countries. It's driving migration. It's led to things like Brexit, which have a direct economic impact. So climate change, the impact on food, the impact on our physical planet, we're already seeing manifest itself into economic challenge. And therefore, how we address the costs of escalating carbon footprint, how we maintain a fair level playing field across the world where if Canada gets too far ahead and the US doesn't follow, do you disadvantage yourself trying to be carbon compliant with the Paris Accord, and do you actually lose jobs which cause political pressure and social upheaval? So the journey of global citizens to a safer, longer, sustainable growth platform is far from certain. And you have some players and some non-players right now. And to me, as a business leader, I'm seeing the volatility of climate change in a number of factors, and it's going to be an increasing factor in disruption in our world. Social economic stability, social political stability on our planet. I could spend the next hour on this, but I'd summarize it in kind of 3 concepts. You have to fundamentally change what you do, your strategy, how you do it, and who does it. So on the what you do, I would characterize the banking industry globally as one for the last 100 years built from the bank out to the customer. We always looked at our regulatory needs, our processing needs, large data management, securing people's bank accounts and cash as a preeminent requirement, and then built customer interfaces and tried to make it simple and tried to adjust to customer needs. But there's always a mismatch between bank needs and true customer simplicity and customer ease and access and convenience. I think we're in a secular opportunity where you can reimagine the role you play in a client's life and redefine your organization from the customer in for the first time in our history. And I think it's a really exciting time to do that. New technologies allow you to do that, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's blockchain, cloud-based data services, all kinds of new capabilities, along with these new platforms and this new global consumer that really challenges us to redefine our bank. And I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time to be in the banking industry and any B2C services, B2B services industry to redefine who you are for the next 50 plus years. So a time of enormous change and business model transformation and customer centricity transformation. Moving, as you pointed out, at a cadence driven by others and non-traditional players and platforms in the industry. So how do you respond to that from, if you define a clear what I want to do and the vision of what you want to be going forward, we can't execute that vision on our old organizational systems, organizational layouts and structure in the organization and work processes. So we've spent the last 5 years going through a cultural revolution on how we work. We need to work in agile teams. We need to co-locate engineers with architects, with process designers, with business owners and P&L owners to design products, design services, design processes, channels from the customer in. And many of these involve the customer and helping us redesign our bank for them. And that's where we've had the greatest success. Investor and Treasury Services, a global business based out of Toronto and London, England, are completely redesigning their platform with customers in mind, institutional customers. And the customers are participating in the design process, saying, I like more of this, less of this. So how you work in agile teams and the way you design and implement using cloud-based services, the way you test increases the cadence, the accuracy of what you're trying to build, less error in getting off scope and meeting the needs of what you're trying to do. And therefore, really mission critical, increasing the cadence. You need to flatten your organization. And you need to change your culture. You need to change your culture around leadership, what you're asking a leader. We launched a leadership model last year in our cultural change that really clearly set out 4 core needs or what we're looking for from the leader of the future. Being more curious, and we can go through that in greater detail if you like, but certainly challenging your leaders to lead in a certain way, challenging the work creation and workflow. And that all led to who's going to do it. And the types of skills you need in your organization are drastically changing. We're working with big data. We're working with blockchain. We're working with AI capabilities. We're interacting with a customer in a more diverse way where we need confident salespeople that don't just reside in a branch, but are capable of going into the community and talking to customers, or getting out of the branch and into a different footprint. So every element of how we interact in our organization is changing. So we need different types of skills, from Salesforce skills to leadership skills to technology skills to we need designers, process designers, product designers, systems design are all different. We need leaders who can work in a dynamic team in a scrum with short-term deliverables that can constantly change. So that's placed a real challenge on our training and on our hiring and our selection of leaders in the organization. So the what's changed, the how's changed, and the who has to change at the same time. Creating transformational change or creating any type of change in the context of a crisis is relatively easy. There's a call to action. You have to fix it or else we may not survive, and the crisis is right in front of you. Changing an organization when it's thriving and when it's producing great results is a much more difficult thing. So it's clearly articulating the challenges and how you see the world changing and describing clearly those elements of change and the impact they have and getting the team to buy in. So part of it is describing a different future in a compelling way with a deep understanding, bringing in outsiders to talk about that world and reinforce the perspective and the conviction around. I always ask my team, well, were you successful last year? And they say, absolutely. I say, why? What did you do that made you successful? And they struggle a little bit more with that. But ultimately, they always come up with a couple of ideas as why they were successful. And I say, which ones are repeatable? And I go, what do you mean? All of them? No. Are you sure? Are you sure you're going to be able to repeat that success? Or do you have to change that even though you're successful? Always ask, why were you successful? We love to ask the question why we weren't successful. More important question sometimes is why were we successful and how repeatable is it? That eliminates complacency. Always challenging, next year may not replicate itself. What do we have to change? What do we have to do differently? To your point on fear of change and it paralyzing an organization, which it often does, I find that when you empower people who control change, then change doesn't become a threat. When change is imposed on an organization or an association or a culture, it tends to resist. So the key is to, from the bottom up, is to get buy-in for change as a vision, but at the same time, control the implementation and let them decide on the journey to get there. Therefore, when you empower change in an organization, both ways, then you get greater buy-in. You get much greater. So it's really important, the empowerment and some of the decisions around that change have to be spread throughout the organization. When someone has control, I think you get greater buy-in. Yes, certainly as you go through the process, you want to talk about prioritization. And as you talk about what has to change, I found in the organization, the lower you go in the organization, the clearer they are on the challenge and how customers are changing. And they're waiting for the opportunity in many cases to say, no, we need more of this and less of this. And empowering and bringing that out is often a catalyst for quicker change in the products you have, the services you have, how you work. So I think that is one way of unlocking the capability is letting them drive. Some of them are most successful products in the organization in the last 10 years came out of employee surveys. When I would read through the employee survey, and it's not just the ratings they gave, but more important, the written comments, I started to see themes of people asking for certain services and products. And when I challenged the head office product owners, they would say, oh, it's going to cannibalize this, it's going to cannibalize that. But I said, yet the sales force is really saying that with this, I'll be able to do different things. So as you start unlocking that potential, you start, well, let's strike a product development team with the sales force or with this individual group. Can we unlock some ideas on how we might be able to create a winning shareholder and customer value proposition? So certainly bringing that team together and creating an agile team to deal with those issues, I think really helps the cadence of change and also the control of change. Everybody in that room has input when you work in an agile way into all dimensions of a decision, whereas our old way of working was very much a matrix, functions, business lines coming together, they each play their roles, but that's not an agile team. An agile team is the whole owns the entire process, decision, and journey, and therefore, never forget, I had this interaction with a team. They're presenting an agile team, their outcome. It was a great outcome on a customer solution. And at the very end, one of our leaders, mid-level leaders, stood up and said, I've been with this company for 20 years. I've played functional roles. I've played business roles. I always had a role to play. It's the first project where you got the whole me. And I go, what do you mean? I said, I've been a risk manager most of my life, but I've got marketing intuition. And when I got into this agile team, I started to contribute on how we might sell more product or how we could communicate the benefits to the customer. It's the first time you've gotten the whole me. When I left that meeting, I said, what would happen if I could do that 80,000 times across the organization? Am I unlocking the true potential of our employees? And I think that, again, helps with change management. That I would say most of our institutions across Western world commerce, the commercial world, we're not getting 100% of the potential of our employee. And finding ways to unlock that produces a much higher return for an organization to have a more engaged workforce. And I think, again, increases the readiness to adopt change and that pace of change. There are a number of core capabilities, and I think as the world changes, we start to emphasize different ones. I would say you have to build a vision of where you're going. I think having a North Star, trying to understand and not be paralyzed by the cadence of change and the complexity of change, you still have to pick a destiny, a direction, an end state you want to get to, but leave it to your team to get you there with flexibility. But if you don't have a North Star and know where you're going, you could get sideswept into so many different areas. So it's filtering through what's important for organization and building a compelling destination to say, our organization needs to create this type of value, be this to the client, and compete in this way, and therefore we have to look like this and do these things really well. And to define that clearly for your team is really important. So we call it vision, we can call it a lot of things, but in essence, it's clearly defining what you want to be to who, and then trusting your team with some guidelines and boundaries on finding a path there, but not necessarily hard defining it, because given the volatility and how fast competitors are changing and new entrants are coming, you're certainly going to have to change your route and sometimes your destination a little bit. And therefore, resilience comes to mind. You have to be resilient. There are many more setbacks because things are happening so fast that you think you have a clear path to launching a product. You think you're going to be first to market only to have someone usurp that. And therefore, you're going to continue on the path, you're going to change the product, you can change the market strategy. All of this requires kind of quick redeveloping, or you're struggling from a technology perspective and what you thought was buildable is not buildable. Where do you go from here? So I think there's resilience and handling setbacks at an increasing cadence, and then we call it pivoting. Some people call it failing fast, is when to stop, when to go in a different direction. It's hard for big organizations because you're trying to build your brand, you're trying to, as an individual, you're trying to be successful so you get promoted, and therefore stopping something and saying it didn't work or won't work, and I'm going to take my resources, financial and team, and go this direction, requires courage. And that's another thing, courage to be transparent, courage to make those tough decisions on projects and people is even greater, I think, than it was in the past, because things are moving so quickly that you can squander a lot of resources if you're not resilient and you don't have courage. Curiosity, you have to constantly scan that changing environment, constantly look for ideas outside your industry. It's an old saying, but I think it's never been more important that you invest time in building networks, you invest time in learning about how others are competing, how others are creating value, how worlds are changing, because to have vision and to pick a destination requires enormous curiosity, constantly learning. You start with MBA school, or you think you're finishing many times with MBA school. It's just the start. It's just the start. You're constantly learning out there, and you need the humility to, as a leader, so I'd add humility, to say, I'll never know it all. And we certainly don't hire for people who know. We hire for people who can find the answer, because the answers are changing. And if you know an answer, it could be a liability, because that's the old answer to the old idea, to the old strategy. What's the new idea to the new strategy, to the new market? So that ability to adapt with humility and be transparent about it is very different than when I started in business, where ego and structure and hierarchy and title kind of dictated decision-making power and capability. And I think you're turning organizations upside down. Sometimes as a leader, you're farthest from it, and you have to acknowledge that. So the humility to get to the right solution, irrespective of title and organizational structure, creates a winning institution. So it's many things, but it's a lot of those. The startup has a founder-owner mentality. They're driving to solve for a few problems, trying to create value, trying to create a winning customer solution. They're doing it with less structure, less systems. They're moving fast, trying to create some type of traction on one idea usually, and therefore speed to survival and speed to kind of scale with their idea is mission critical, and don't need the systems and structures around finance and HR and operations, and therefore the decision considerations are quite different, and therefore your leadership style and your leadership capability is more focused. as a large organization evolves and you've got 15 million customers and your connectivity to the economy and to stakeholders and public nature requires a different skill set. And therefore that skill set evolves over time and complexity, and you're less hands-on in many things, but you're responsible for everything, but you control much less than you do as a founder owner of a firm that probably controls 90% of the decisions to someone who controls kind of 5% of the decisions. It's very, very different. I think there's the technical skills will become somewhat akin to being able to do math or reading or arithmetic, and coding. They're part of building out and solving problems. But where humans are going to have to add value versus machines, we wanted to more clearly define that machines are not a threat. Machines are not going to replace humans. Machines for the foreseeable future will be support to humans, whether it's driving a car or a truck or performing an operation or teaching a class or giving financial advice. Humans will be at the point where complex decisions are made, where relationships are needed, where empathy is needed, where creativity in a different capacity is needed, and there can be growing areas where machines will support humans and not replace them, and therefore the orientation of how we've always learned and how we've progressed has to change. And I think the Humans Wanted report is a very important marker to say, let's not be threatened. I think machines can enrich our lives and make us more productive and make us healthier and smarter. And we as global citizens can really create value this way. And the menial things that we used to do to make the economy work, to make industry work, to make government work, some of it can be replaced in a repetitive task with a machine, and we can reapply ourselves to higher valued activities. And therefore, the Humans Wanted approach was say, we're going to create a lot of jobs in the future as we go through this transition. And these are some of the jobs and how you might transition. And let's not fear change, but as I said before, let's take control of change by taking control of our destiny. I think you look at 2 time horizons. Certainly in the short term, and I think we're in that process now, we're building the transformative world as we go. So we've got new skills, AI capabilities, blockchain capabilities, cloud-based data gathering, all these scientists, engineers building driverless cars technology, building robotics, building banking systems of the future. So there's a significant net new demand for these skills to build the economy and our world of the future. At the same time, we have not unwound the architecture of the old world, and we've protected most of those jobs. There is some migration, but net, we've created jobs to make this. So I call this the transformative phase, which could go for a couple of decades. And therefore, I think we're going to be short on jobs in many cases. At the same time, in the Western world, we're seeing the boomers start to retire. Therefore, we need more productivity. And therefore, I don't worry in the short term about the transfer journey that we're on. I worry in the medium term about the pace. I do think when we get to this ultimate destination that we'll have created more jobs, that we'll get to a better place and a more productive and a better world to live in. The second part of that journey where we've coming through the transformative set of jobs, that we start to take out some of those repetitive jobs in the economy, that's where we're going to have to think about is how does that flow? Because we've gone through periods of enormous change, the Industrial Revolution, and it created pretty significant socio-political upheaval. It wasn't smooth, there was violence, and as a society, we have to think about how do we make that second phase. I think we're going to get to a good place, but it may require management of the disruption and helping reposition people, which is why experimenting with basic universal income or other methodologies or other hypotheses on how we bridge the transition phase is important. Universal income, basic income may not be the right solution. It may not create the incentives we want, but we have to start experimenting with different ideas to bridge that second phase so we don't see some of the upheaval we saw in previous significant disruptions in our history. It's a great question. And I think when I went through an undergrad, graduate degree, I viewed it as a system of static learning, and that there were preconditions of the past, skills that you need to learn. They were delivered in very kind of rote, formulated way, and then you sent us off to deal with the world. And in my case, and most of my peers from my generation, never to really go back to that institution to review, change, transform. I think the institution of the future is one that supports continuous learning. It's a very different role. And maybe you deliver less upfront. If it took me 6 years to get a graduate and undergraduate degree, maybe that's too much time upfront. And maybe you'd take half of that time, but then you back in 3 years over time. So whatever the mix is, I think educational institutions have a huge role to play in helping us reposition skills in the economy. For those who are even in role and trying to transform as a leader, transform as a technologist, transform as a medical profession, there is a lot of continuous learning and change that has to happen. And I think education institutions are mission critical in providing a source of continuous learning and using those credits. And then helping those reposition in the economy who are disrupted is an even greater challenge. Where are they going? What's the technical colleges, the universities? Who's going to take that person who used to perform a task within a profession that's no longer available, and they have to make more of a disruptive change in their life? We're going to have to retrain them as a society. And therefore, educational institutions, I think, will be called on to a much greater degree in that phase 2 transformation than we've seen in our society in the past. And therefore, for those two reasons, I think the role is going to be 2x of what it has been in the past. You have to do what I articulated right off the top. Redefine the what, from kind of a static undergrad, graduate learning environment, research, to a different what, continuous learning, which means how you train and how you distribute that training. You can't expect everyone to go to you, but I think the industry has started to transform over time of building more convenient locations, building a digital training capability. You have to build different programs, you have to deliver those programs differently, and then you have to think about the who. Is the researcher professor on campus the best person to deliver that training, or are you going to need someone else? So I think you have to go through the same process I'm going through with the Royal Bank. What, how, and who, and redefine. I really would recommend the process I went through. I think the case-based learning strategy and process at Ivey, and I think other schools have picked that up. You know, looking at 1,000 business cases, 1,000 companies, 1,000 decision-making points over whatever. I did it in a 2-year degree at the time. Times have changed. Creates a body of knowledge to draw on in times of change. Things are moving so fast. You have to build in a DNA of what to do. You have to build in methodologies and frameworks and how to solve problems. And repetition and instinct are important. And I think going through a case-oriented program and the frequency of making those decisions builds context for you to draw. And I think that's very important. So I think obviously the world's changed and decision-making points have changed and the complexities of new technology changed the types of decisions, but that process of viewing those business cases, I think we're in a time that's never been better for analyzing disruptive change and teaching the next generation, because there's so many real-life examples in front of us versus in the past when many of the cases I looked at in 1990s when I was at school were from the 80s, a time of less disruption, harder to find change management. You just look around the world, there's so many learning opportunities in real time to put students into those decision-making and help them kind of build their gut feel. I think you've got the right architecture to do it. You just have to continue to modernize the what.